right, so this morning we're going to do something a little bit different than the meditation, just a little bit different. So the talk today is based on yoga and things like that, how unity principles tie into yoga, and we'll go over that in a little while in the talk. But today during our meditation, what I want to ask you to do, if it feels comfortable and if you choose to participate in this way, but we're going to take our hands together and we're going to put them in what's called the lotus mudra. And see how it's kind of shaped like a lotus. If you put your pinkies and your thumbs together, you'll have kind of a lotus shape. And as we do this, we place it up against our heart. Because what the intention of this is to draw inspiration from the purity and the perseverance of that lotus flower. Because like the lotus flower, we float above muddy waters, because that's how the lotus floats. It floats on top of them, just a little bit above the muddy water. In those muddy waters of desire and fear and attachment, those feelings that really cause us to lash out at others and ourselves. So today, let's hold that. Let's hold that for ourselves and just hold it against your heart if you feel comfortable as we go through the meditation. And we'll go ahead and start that. But everybody just closing your eyes and just allowing yourselves to just breathe naturally. Just allowing yourselves to just really move into this present moment. Just letting any attachments that don't serve your higher self just go in this moment. Just leaving them outside of the doors of where we are right now. This sacred container of the present moment. I invite you just to imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a favorite room you have. Maybe a favorite place somewhere out in nature, next to a brook or a river or the ocean, the mountains. Maybe you're in a hammock. Maybe you've got your bare feet firmly rooted to Mother Earth. In a lawn chair, laying upon the ground. Wherever it is, you're comfortable in this favorite spot. And this favorite spot is just peace, just pure peace. It is your sacred space that nothing else can penetrate. Allow yourself to feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. Maybe a cool breeze. Just feeling perfect in this moment. And I ask you to repeat the following silently to yourself after me. May I be free from inner and outer harm. May I be happy and peaceful. May I be healthy and strong. May I look after myself joyfully. Now I invite you to create I am statements with these instead and repeat the following after me. I am free from inner and outer harm. I am happy and peaceful. I am healthy and strong. I look after myself joyfully. And as we enter into our moment of silence here in just a moment, just allow yourself to just let these statements, these affirmations just really move into your consciousness. Just allowing them to be, allowing the truth to be known as we move into our moment of silence. And as we draw our focus back to this present moment, we know that this sanctuary, this favorite place, is within. And it's always a place we can go to anytime, that beautiful, peaceful place within. That place where we once again affirm that we are free from inner and outer harm. We are happy and peaceful. We are healthy and strong. And we look after ourselves joyfully. Allowing ourselves, like the lotus flower, to float above the muddy waters of fear and attachments and those things that don't serve our higher good. And in this moment, we just allow it to be. And so it is. Namaste. Spiritual principles everywhere, even in Frozen. So thanks for reminding us of that, Pete. That was a really nice song, actually. And I've never really seen Frozen, I'll admit it, so, that was something for me. I need to watch it. Cartoons are one of those things, like even Shrek. Remember when Shrek came out? I didn't want to watch it, but I made myself watch it. And when I did, I really enjoyed it, and I've now seen them all. So maybe Frozen would be one of those. I don't know. But I'm Reverend Evin Wilkins, for anybody who may be tuning in to our live stream for the first time. So it's good to be here, and seems like our group is growing a little bit more every Sunday, so that makes me happy. I like seeing some faces I haven't seen in a while. I'm not going to point people out, but Linda and I kind of joke because right before everything shut down, she and I saw each other in the Pick and Save parking lot. And we hugged each other, and for the longest, Linda was the last person I had hugged in the congregation, so it was good. So we've talked about that a little bit over the year. But so anyway, yeah, our talk, I'm not talking about yams, about sweet potatoes today. Yama is a yoga principle, and we'll kind of get into that through the talk. But I want to talk a little bit about yoga. And, about 3 years ago, I started a yoga practice. And a part of me had always been really skeptical about yoga, because it appeared to me for the longest time to be nothing but a bunch of stretches. I'd see people do it, and I'd be like, well, they're stretching, and they probably feel great from all those stretches. But I don't know that I really saw much benefit beyond that. And I remember seeing pictures of Madonna, and I'm talking about the singer, not the religious figure. But I remember seeing pictures of her several years ago. She was all like fit and had these toned arms and shoulders and everything. And she says, well, all I do is yoga. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. You did not get to looking like that by doing yoga. But part of that lied in the fact that, I'd always kind of been a little athletic at that point. I'd go out on weekends and I'd run really long distances, or I'd get on my bicycle and I would cycle these really long distances. It was nothing to go out and cycle 100 miles in a day. Or my weekend trips, I'd go out and I'd go on these long weekend runs, no less than like 10 miles a day. I really pushed myself when I went out and did this stuff. And I used to think it wasn't really doing me any good unless I just went out and I went all in, just all out, hard as I could. But of course, time to begin to wear on a little bit. In Austin, Texas, where I used to do a lot of my bicycling, it started to grow. And that growth brought about a lot of cars on the road. And it just got to where it was no longer safe for cycling the way that I used to. And then, so I started running more. My knees started creaking and popping more with the running. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I should cut back a little bit on that too. And I began to look for other sources of different types of exercise. And I started also thinking back a little bit about the running and the cycling. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know that I ever even really enjoyed them. I thought I just mostly had to do them. But one of my friends that used to accompany me on some of these runs and cycling, he comes up one day and he's like, have you ever tried yoga? He'd begin practicing, and he's like, I really think that I found my thing. So yoga has popped back up. And I'm thinking, well, if he's really enjoying it, I suppose I'll give it a try. And I did. And I soon began to realize that the transformations in my body were amazing, and they were quite unexpected, but in a good way. I'd never been really a person who was flexible enough to reach down and touch my toes. And before long, I could suddenly touch my toes. Well, not suddenly. It took a little bit of time, but before long, I could touch my toes, and my core strength was getting better. My posture was getting better, and it wasn't hard on the body. It wasn't, my knees weren't creaking with it. And I also began to notice another benefit. I was becoming more calm. Things that had previously bothered me weren't bothering me as much, and some of them really stopped bothering me altogether. It was as if this transformation was starting to come over me, and at that time though, I still didn't really say it was yoga. I just was like, well, I'm feeling better overall. That's what it is. So Mindy starts doing it too, and then after a while, we started to subscribe to Yoga Magazine. And I began to see statements about people talking about living yoga. And I'm thinking, living yoga? What? How could you live yoga? It's just something that you do. What did it mean to live yoga? So I decided to embark upon a quest to really see what it meant to live yoga and to see if I could take a part in this. And I began to learn. And I wanted to share some of what I've learned here because I feel it ties in really nicely to a lot of the principles and tools that we use, that we learn about and we use here at Unity. Now, last week I mentioned a book that I use for my daily meditations, and it's called Meditations on Intention and Being by a man named Rolf Gates. He's a yoga teacher, and he also teaches yoga teachers now at this point. But the year before that, I had used his other daily meditation book called Meditations from the Mat, Daily Reflections on the Path of Yoga. Now, I'm not going to get too much into yoga philosophy and everything today, but it contains an 8-limb path. Now, of course, we're not going to cover all 8 limbs here today for sure, but I do want to quote Mr. Gates here when he says, the 8-limb path is all about behavior. It's about our actions not our good intentions. He says we must do estimable things. The emphasis is on doing. He then quotes another author, Amina Hafez, who summarizes it as, we act great all the time. So in other words, he's not suggesting that we act great only when we feel like acting great. Because I know I don't feel like acting great every day. I don't know if anybody else in here does, but that we instead act great whether we feel like it or not. So some of the things I learned about living yoga is that it's really all about the doing. It's not about lip service and then just forgetting about the rest. It's all about the actions that we take. Now, to me, that sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Kind of ties just a little bit into spiritual and unity principles. Now, of course, we're not going to cover all 8 limbs, but I'll start with the first one, which is Yama or Yamas. I've seen it both ways, plural or singular. Now, I found a blog called the Liquido blog, and according to that blog, the Yamas describe the whole fabric of our life: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social. The Yamas focus on the ethical standards of how we should conduct ourselves in daily life and the behavior to develop during interactions with the self and others. So the Yamas contain 5 moral restraints, which are nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, moderation, and non-hoarding. So today I really want to delve into the nonviolence, or ahimsa as it's called in Sanskrit. So really nonviolence, we would think it would be a pretty obvious one, right? You know, it's something that we typically learn at a really early age in our lives. We're taught that it's not right to be violent. We're taught we don't hurt other people and we don't hurt other living beings. It doesn't mean that people don't still do it sometimes, yet we also know when we do that it's not really something we're supposed to be doing. Now, one of our Unity 12 powers is love, and it's love for a reason. We can't really practice love if we're also creating violence in some way or the other, can we? It's a little hard for those two to kind of coexist together. We learn about the do's and don'ts with others all day long. But today I want to focus on what some of the do's and don'ts are with ourselves when it comes to ahimsa and nonviolence. So there's our focus today, implementing the Yama of ahimsa for ourselves. Now I think, and we've talked about this type of thing before, but I think most of us likely realize that we are often our own biggest critic and judge, aren't we? Sometimes we're criticizing and judging ourselves when the people around us probably haven't even thought about it. You know, we're thinking, oh, they must be, thinking I'm this or I'm that or I'm no good at this or that. That thought may have never even crossed their mind, but it's crossing our minds about ourselves. So I'm going to ask a question, and you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. Those of you at home may feel more comfortable, and that's fine. But just think about it to yourselves. How many of you currently, or have ever currently looked in the mirror and thought, good grief, what in the world am I looking at here today? Those lines on my face, man, where did that come from? The color of my hair, God, that's just not a good color. You get the gist, right? We've all been there before. Whatever it is you're looking at it, and you just think that you really don't like it. And I would imagine most of us have been there at some point, and those of you online, we see you. Mine used to be about my thinning hair. It was like the moment I turned 40, boom, this started going, and I'm like, I've learned since to just go with it, but But when we really get to the root of it, we're ultimately lacking compassion for ourselves when we do this. There's some kind of non-acceptance, and whatever it is, it doesn't really fall into the alignment of love at that moment, does it? There's a reason that the Botox and plastic surgery industries are such multi-million-dollar industries. We see things we don't want to accept about ourselves. Our outer appearance in this case, but we begin to look for ways out there, something outside there to fix it for us. Now here at Unity, we have about 5 basic principles that we adhere to. The second principle is this. It says, our essence is of God. Therefore, we are inherently good. This God essence was fully expressed in Jesus the Christ. It doesn't say we're only inherently good when we look in the mirror and we see what we consider to be the perfect bodily specimen staring back at us. I didn't personally know Jesus, but something tells me he didn't hit the gym every day thinking that he could only express the Christ within himself when he looked like a Greek god. Maybe he did, I don't know, but I'm not getting that with what he said. But that's on the outside, right? What about the inside? What is going on inside the head? So let's think for a moment. Let's think of the beliefs that we hold about ourselves. What beliefs do you hold about yourself? Or perhaps what is the tone of your internal dialogue? How does it sound on a daily basis? Or your beliefs about yourself and your internal dialogue, examples of your God essence? Are they of your Christ nature? So I think compassion and showing some kindness to ourselves is a good place to start when it comes to practicing ahimsa or nonviolence. And how is it that we can do this? How is it that we can accept all of ourselves and all of our greatness, both inside and out, and to really practice our unity principle of love, that spiritual principle of love? It even goes beyond unity. Now, first, practicing love for ourselves, it begins to set a couple of things into action here. One of those things is that it also makes us want to and available to help others. In the Tao of Contemplation, author Jasmine Lee Corey tells us this. She says, when your heart is open, you naturally want to reach out and help others. There are different ways people talk about this. Some describe it as serving God and others, while other people say that it is God who is serving through us. Mother Teresa combined these when she spoke of doing the work of Jesus, for Jesus, to Jesus. So back to the how for a moment. First, think about one of those times that I mentioned when you looked in the mirror and held an internal dialogue that was out of alignment of love. Ask yourself, is this something that I would say to someone else? If not, why would you say it to yourself about yourself? Remember the rule we were all taught about using bad language? If you wouldn't say it in front of your mother or your grandmother, you shouldn't say it to other people. Well, let's use that same thing for ourselves. If you wouldn't say it to your mom or to your grandmother or to somebody else in your family, why would you say it to yourself? And it doesn't only apply to the mirror. It applies to life on a daily basis. That internal dialogue that we likely always have going on with ourselves, because sometimes it seems to never stop, right? Silently berating ourselves or telling ourselves that we're not good enough or attractive enough or whatever the case is. One of the things I like to do is this. Say I have a negative thought that enters my mind. Maybe I've just called myself dense or something, something similar to that. I'll write it down on a piece of paper. I'll have a piece of paper, I'll do 2 columns. I'll write down that word that keeps coming to mind or something I said about myself. And on the other column, I'll write something to counter it. If I called myself dense, maybe I want to say that I'm smart or intelligent, something that counteracts that word. It's very similar to the practice of denials and affirmations, maybe just a little bit more simplistic in nature. But try this for every negative or untoward thought you have about yourself for a week. And at the end of the week, sometimes some of you may even want to do it daily, but at the end of the week, take that piece of paper and rip it in half. You can have your own burning bowl. You can rip it up into that part into tiny pieces and put it in the recycle bin, or even shred it and create a visualization exercise around it. I like to sometimes visualize that stuff going up into the sun where it just burns up and is never to be seen again. It's a good visualization for me. But yours may be something altogether different. And just do whatever it is that works best for you personally. I just invite you to participate in some kind of a release exercise where you can let it go and replace it with something that's true. Because that junk, that internal dialogue, if it doesn't serve your highest good, it's just not true. It's not truth. And keep the other side. Keep the positive and true things that you've written down. Fold it up. Keep it in your purse or your wallet. Your pocket next to your bed at night. Just keep it somewhere where it's close to you every day. And after a while, you may even find that you're making the list less and less as time goes on. Practicing ahimsa just a little bit more each day. And the more we love ourselves and forgive ourselves, treat ourselves with kindness, the easier it becomes to practice ahimsa with other beings and other people as well. In the practice that I mentioned a moment ago about making the 2 columns on a sheet of paper, we can also implement this practice when we have the same kinds of thoughts about others. It works for our thoughts and practicing ahimsa towards others as well, other beings and other people. And forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big one. Lots of times it always goes back to forgiveness. Being willing to forgive ourselves for those times when we maybe felt like we were a little less than perfect, right? Not berating ourselves for that. Maybe we put too much salt in the Thanksgiving stuffing one year. People weren't able to eat it. Now we can all have a laugh in future Thanksgivings about the year the stuffing was too salty, right? But it could be something a little more than that. Maybe it's something hurtful that you said to someone or that someone else said back to you at some point. Maybe it's something else entirely, only you know that. But withholding forgiveness for ourselves and or others can often be the worst kind of emotional violence we can inflict upon ourselves. Author Anne Lamott once said, "Not forgiving is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die." It just doesn't work that way, does it? But holding on to those resentments, they only hurt ourselves, inflicting further violence. And I'm sure most of us, anybody that's familiar with the Bible, remember the story of Peter and Jesus in Matthew? When Peter asked Jesus how many times we should forgive someone. Then Peter came up to him and said, "How often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. Now Jesus, of course, didn't literally mean, you need to go up to him and apologize. What is it? 70 times 7 times. 70 signifies spiritual perfection. So 70 times 7 means that we need to forgive someone completely and not let it continue to play over and over again in our minds. Because when we do that, that's still withholding that forgiveness. And this also includes about ourselves. And to do this takes a willingness, because we're going to need to do the work, right? So we're going to have to be willing to do the work that it requires. That's why it's so important to implement a forgiveness practice in our lives. Now for me, one of the ways I like to implement my own forgiveness practice is I'll find a quiet place where I can sit undisturbed for a little while, and I like to sit in another chair or another cushion just kind of in front of me. And I like to participate in a visualization exercise where I sit down and I picture the child version of myself sitting across from me. And I visualize this child version of myself telling me what they did that they feel warrants forgiveness. I then speak back with that child the same way I would any child. I tell my younger self, "I love you and I forgive you." And then in that visualization, I wrap the child up in a gentle hug. And I'll sometimes not even try it as a visualization. I like to write, so sometimes I'll even do it as a writing exercise, as if I'm writing this out in dialogue, as if I'm writing a story. And of course, there are many ways to implement your own forgiveness practice, but whichever way you choose, one of those or something entirely different, I just highly encourage you to do this, because forgiveness can really be one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves, and then ultimately other people, because then we're more available for other people as well. So I found a website, and I thought the name was kind of funny, but it had some good stuff. But it's called Peaceful Dumpling. But I found a statement that I felt fit perfectly today. It said, I challenge you to practice being mindful. I challenge you to listen to yourself. And when you hear that voice of negativity or self-hatred, and the violence that comes with it, make the conscious choice to silence it and replace it with something kind. As the Dalai Lama said, be the change you wish to see in the world. It all starts inside us. The Buddha once said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Proverbs 19:8 from the Bible states, to acquire wisdom is to love oneself. People who cherish understanding will prosper. So back to my original thought on yoga being really nothing more than stretches. I found that it's so much more than that. To me, it's almost putting our principles into action. Sure, it still contains stretches, and it still oftentimes contains a lot of moaning and groaning on my part as I'm, twisting myself around. But I also take yoga with me when I take it off the mat. It's all about what we learn here and taking it out into the world and putting it into action in the doing portion of it. But it all starts with the yamas, with ahimsa, nonviolence, being one of them. We've got to make room for love, and it starts with loving ourselves. Corinthians 13:13. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Namaste. And now real quick, Pete, before we do more music, I want to invite Nancy Sundahl up. She's going to come up to talk about one of our subcommittees. I was going to introduce her as Nancy Sundahl, the treasurer of the board, which she is, but I didn't want everybody to freak out with the treasurer coming up here.